So good evening. This evening, we celebrate just a few of the many, many voices of women who raised up their own voices, helped others find theirs, and be heard. 1848, a group of women, led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton of New York, organized the first Women's Rights Convention, and they publish the Declaration of Sentiments, which begins the long struggle for the vote. Hear now their voices.
The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.
He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise.
He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice.
He has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners.
Having deprived her of this first right of citizenship, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation, he has oppressed her on all sides.
He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead.
He has taken from her all right in property, even to the wages she earns.
He has made her morally an irresponsible being, as she can commit many crimes with impunity, provided they be done in the presence of her husband. In the covenant of marriage, she is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming, to all intents and purposes, her master. The law giving him power to deprive her of her liberty and to administer chastisement.
He has so framed the laws of divorce as to what shall be the proper causes of divorce, in case of separation, to whom the guardianship of the children shall be given, as to be wholly regardless of the happiness of women. The law, in all cases, going upon the false supposition of the supremacy of man, and giving all power into his hands.
After depriving her of all rights as a married woman, if single and the owner of property, he has taxed her to support a government which recognizes her only when her property can be made profitable to it.
He has monopolized nearly all the profitable employments, and from those she is permitted to follow, she receives but a scanty remuneration.
He closes against her all the avenues to wealth and distinction, which he considers most honorable to himself. As a teacher of theology, medicine, or law, she is not known.
He has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her.
He allows her in church as well as in state, but a subordinate position, claiming apostolic authority for her exclusion from the ministry, and with some exceptions, from any public participation in the affairs of the church.
He has created a false public sentiment by giving to the world a different code of morals for men and women.
He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life.
Now, in view of this entire disenfranchisement of one half the people of this country, in view of the unjust laws above mentioned, and because women do feel themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of these United States.
In entering upon the great work before us, we anticipate no small amount of misconception, misrepresentation, and ridicule. But we shall use every instrumentality within our power to effect our object.
Resolved that such laws as conflict in any way with the true and substantial happiness of women are contrary to the great precept of nature and of no validity.
Resolved that all laws which prevent woman from occupying such a station in society as her conscience shall dictate, or which place her in a position inferior to that of man, are contrary to the great precept of nature, and therefore of no force and no validity.
Resolved that woman is man's equal, was intended to be so by the Creator, and the highest good of the race demands that she should be recognized as such.
Resolved that the women of this country ought to be enlightened in regard to the laws under which they live, that they may no longer publish their degradation by declaring themselves satisfied with their present position, nor their ignorance by asserting that they have all the right they want.
Resolved that woman has too long rested satisfied in the circumscribed limits which corrupt customs and a perverted application of the scriptures have marked out for her, and that it is time that she should move in the enlarged sphere which her great Creator has assigned her. Resolved that it is the duty of the women of this country to secure to themselves their sacred right to the elective franchise. In the second half of the 19th century, a woman who had been enslaved found her way to freedom and to a tireless activism for her own people, for their liberty, and for the suffrage of all women. Sojourner Truth made this speech in 1851.
Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women of the North, all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helped me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me my best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I could have plowed and planted and gathered into barns and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off into slavery. When I cried my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? That's it, intellect. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to give me my little half measure full? Then that man in the black back there, he says women can't have as much rights as men, 'cause Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down, all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do it. The men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me. Now old Sojourner's gone. Got nothing more to say.
Susan B. Anthony dares to vote. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were friends for more than 50 years, and during that time, they founded the women's movement and they fought for suffrage, although they didn't see women get the vote in their own lifetime. In 1872, Susan B. registered to vote illegally, and she voted in Rochester, New York. And the struggle really took off at last when the notoriety and the furor of her action began to inspire the public.
Rochester, November the 5th, 1872. Dear Mrs. Stanton, well, I have been and gone and done it. Positively voted the Republican ticket straight this a.m. at 7 o'clock and swore in my vote at that. Was registered on Friday, and 15 other women followed suit in this ward. Then some 20 or 30 others tried to register, but all save 2 were refused. All my 3 sisters voted too. The Honorable Henry R. Selden will be our counsel. He has read up the law and all of our arguments and is satisfied that we are right. Affectionately, Susan B. Anthony.
Of the 30 women who tried to register, Susan B., who was already infamous as a rabble-rouser for suffrage, was the one who was indicted in 1873. Before her trial, she resolved to take her case to the citizens of Monroe County, New York, from where her jurors would be drawn. And she gave her speech, "Is it a crime for a U.S. citizen to vote?" to more than 60 towns and villages in that county.
Friends and fellow citizens, I stand before you tonight under indictment for the alleged crime of having voted illegally at the last presidential election. I shall endeavor this evening to prove to you that in voting I not only committed no crime, but simply exercised my citizen's right as guaranteed to me and all United States citizens by the national Constitution, beyond the power of any state to deny. The preamble of the federal Constitution begins with, "We, the people of the United States." It was we, the people, not we, the white male citizens, nor yet we, the male citizens, but we, the whole people who formed this union. And we formed it not to give the blessings of liberty, but to secure them, not to the half of ourselves and to the half of posterity, but to the whole people, women as well as men. And it is downright mockery to talk to women of their enjoyment of the blessings of liberty while they are denied the use of the only means of securing them provided by this democratic Republican government, the ballot. For any state to make sex a qualification that must ever result in the disenfranchisement of one entire half of the people is therefore a violation of the supreme law of the land. By it, the blessings of liberty are forever withheld from women and their female posterity. To them, this government has no just powers derived from the consent of the governed. To them, this government is not a democracy, it is not a republic, it is an odious aristocracy, a hateful oligarchy. Surely this oligarchy of sex, which makes the men of every household sovereigns, masters, the women subjects, slaves, carrying dissension, rebellion into every home of the nation, cannot be endured. But, it is urged, the use of the masculine pronouns, he, his, and him, in all the Constitution and laws is proof that only men were meant to be included in their provisions. If you insist on this version of the letter of the law, we shall insist that you be consistent and accept the other horn of the dilemma, which would compel you to exempt women from taxation for the support of government and from penalties for the violation of laws. There is no she or he or hers in the tax laws. The same is true of all criminal laws. In the law of May 31st, 1870, the 19th section of which I am charged with having violated, not only are the pronouns masculine, but everybody knows that particular section was intended expressly to hinder the rebels from voting. Precisely so, with all the papers served on me, the U.S. Marshal's warrant, the bail bond, the petition for habeas corpus, the bill of indictment. Not one of them had a feminine pronoun printed in it, but to make them applicable to me, the clerk of the court had made a little caret to the left of he and placed an S over it, making she out of he. I insist if government officials may thus manipulate the pronouns to tax, fine, imprison, and even hang women, women may take the same liberty with them to secure to themselves their right to a voice in government. But whatever room there was for a doubt under the old regime, the adoption of the 14th Amendment settled that question in its first sentence. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. The only question left to be settled now is, are women persons? And I hardly believe any of our opponents will have the hardihood to say they are not. Being persons, then, women are citizens, and no state has a right to make any new law or enforce any old law that shall abridge their privilege or immunities. Hence, every discrimination against women in the Constitution and laws of the several states is today null and void, precisely as is every one against Negroes. Is the right to vote one of the privileges or immunities of citizens?
The trial of Susan B. Anthony. From the official court transcripts, the prosecution speaks. District Attorney Richard Crowley.
May it please the court and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant, Miss Susan B. Anthony, voted for representative in the Congress of the United States to represent the 29th Congressional District of this state, and also for a representative at large for the state of New York to represent the state in the Congress of the United States. At that time, she was a woman. I suppose there can be no question about that. Whatever Miss Anthony's intentions may have been, whether they were good or otherwise, she did not have a right to vote upon that question. And if she did vote without having a lawful right to vote, then there is no question but that she is guilty of violating a law of the United States. Conceded that on the 5th day of November, 1872, Miss Susan B. Anthony was a woman.
Attorney Henry R. Selden speaks.
Your Honor, gentlemen of the jury, the only alleged ground of illegality of the defendant's voting is that she is a woman. If the same act had been done by her brother under the same circumstances, it would have been not only innocent but also laudable and honorable. But having been done by a woman, it is said to be a crime. Now, I believe this is the first instance in which a woman has been indicted in a criminal court merely on account of her sex. Another objection is that the right to hold office must attend the right to vote, and that women are not qualified to discharge the duties of responsible offices. Now, I beg leave to answer this objection by asking a question. How many of the male bipeds that do our voting for us are themselves qualified to hold high office? Another objection is that engaging in political controversies is not consistent with the feminine character. Well, upon that subject, women themselves are surely the best judges. And if political duties should be found inconsistent with female delicacy, we can rest assured that women will either effect a change in the character of political contests or decline to engage in them.
Judge Hunt speaks.
The question, gentlemen of the jury, is wholly a question or questions of law. And I have decided, as a question of law in the first place, that under the 14th Amendment, which Miss Anthony claims protects her, she was not protected in a right to vote. And I have decided also that her belief and the advice which she took do not protect her in the act which she has committed. If I am right in this, the result must be a verdict on your part of guilty. And I therefore direct that you find a verdict of guilty.
Your Honor, that is a direction that no court has the power to issue in a criminal case.
Take the verdict, Mr. Clerk.
Your Honor, I don't know whether an objection is available to me, but I must object. I object to the refusal of the court to submit these propositions, and especially to the direction of the court that the jury should find a verdict of guilty. I claim that it is a power not given to any court in a criminal case. Will the clerk poll the jury?
No. Gentlemen of the jury, you are discharged. The prisoner will stand up. Has the prisoner anything to say why sentence shall not be pronounced?
Yes, Your Honor. I have a great many things to say. For in your ordered verdict of guilty, you have trampled underfoot every vital principle of our government. My natural rights, my civil rights, my political rights, and now my judicial rights are all alike ignored. Robbed of the fundamental privilege of citizenship, I am degraded from the status of a citizen to that of a subject. And not only myself individually, but all of my sex are, by Your Honor's verdict, doomed to political subjection under this so-called form of government.
The court cannot listen to a rehearsal of arguments the prisoner's counsel has already consumed 3 hours in presenting.
May it please Your Honor, I am not arguing the question, but simply stating the reasons why sentence cannot, in justice, be pronounced against me. Your denial of my citizen's right to vote is the denial of my right of representation as one of the taxed, the denial of my right to a trial by a jury of my peers, therefore the denial of my sacred rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All of these.
The court cannot allow the prisoner to go on.
But Your Honor, you will not deny me this one and only poor privilege of protest against this high-handed outrage upon my citizens' rights. May it please the court to remember, since the day of my arrest last November, this is the first time that either myself or any person of my disenfranchised class has been allowed a word of defense before judge or jury.
The prisoner must sit down. The court cannot allow it.
All of my prosecutors, from the 8th Ward Corner grocery politician who entered the complaint, to the United States Marshal, the Commissioner, the District Attorney, and now the District Judge, Your Honor, on the bench, not one is my peer. But each and all are my political sovereigns, and had Your Honor submitted my case to the jury, as was clearly your duty, even then I should have had just cause of protest, for not one of these men was my peer, but native or foreign-born, educated or ignorant, white or black, rich or poor, every one of them was my political superior, hence in no sense my peer. Even under such circumstances, a commoner of England, tried before a jury of lords, would have far less cause to complain than should I, a woman tried before a jury of men. Even my counsel, the Honorable Henry R. Selden, who has argued my case so ably, so earnestly, so unanswerably before Your Honor, he too is my political sovereign. Precisely as no disenfranchised person is entitled to sit upon a jury, and no woman is entitled to the franchise, so none but a regularly admitted lawyer is allowed to practice in these courts, and no woman can gain admission to the bar. Hence, judge, jury, and counsel must all be of the superior classes.
The court must insist the prisoner has been tried according to the establishments of law.
Yes, Your Honor, but by forms of law all made by men, interpreted by men, administered by men, in favor of men and against women, and hence Your Honor's ordered verdict of guilty against a United States citizen for this exercise of that citizen's right to vote, simply because that citizen was a woman and not a man. But yesterday, just 10 years ago, the same man-made forms of law deemed it a crime punishable with a $1,000 fine and 6 months imprisonment for you, for me, for any of us to give a cup of cold water, a crust of bread, or a night's shelter to a panting fugitive tracking his way to Canada, and every man or woman in whose veins coursed a drop of human sympathy violated that wicked law, reckless of the consequences, and they were justified in doing so. As then, the slaves who got their freedom must take it, over or under or through the unjust forms of law, so now, women, to get their right to a voice in this government, must take it. And I have taken mine, and mean to take it at every possible opportunity.
The court orders the prisoner to sit down.
When
I will not allow another word.
When I was brought before Your Honor, for this trial, I hoped for a broad and liberal interpretation of the Constitution and its recent amendments that should declare all United States citizens under its protecting aegis, that should declare equality of rights and national guarantee to all persons born or naturalized in these United States. But failing to get this justice, failing even to get a trial by a jury not of my peers, I ask not leniency at your hands, but rather the full rigors of the law.
The court must insist. The prisoner will stand up. The sentence of the court is that you pay a fine of $100 and the costs of the prosecution.
May it please your honor, I shall never pay $1 of your unjust penalty. All the stock in trade I now possess is a $10,000 debt incurred by publishing my paper, The Revolution, 4 years ago, the sole object of which was to educate all women to do precisely as I have done. Rebel against your man-made, unjust, unconstitutional forms of law that tax, fine, imprison, and hang women while they deny them the right of representation in government. And I shall work on with might and main to pay every $1 of that honest debt, but not a penny shall go to this unjust claim. And I shall earnestly and persistently continue to urge all women to the practical recognition of that old revolutionary maxim: resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. Miss Anthony never did pay her fine, but she continued to organize with her friend Elizabeth Cady Stanton for more than 50 years. The Voting Rights Act didn't come until 1920. They had learned a lot about organizing from the abolition movement, and they also found great role models and inspiration in 2 African-American woman activists, Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman.
From the Rochester, New York Democrat and Chronicle, November 19, 1896. A woman's suffrage meeting was held here just 2 weeks ago. Susan B. Anthony and Mrs. Stanton were on the platform, and after speeches had been made and business accomplished, Miss Anthony went out into the aisle and led up to the platform an old colored woman. Ladies, I am glad to present to you Harriet Tubman, who generally attends every meeting of women on whatever subject and has organized many of her own. She was also the conductor of the Underground Railroad. The old woman bowed modestly as Miss Anthony presented her, and when she commenced to speak, her voice, low and tremulous at first, rose gradually as she warmed to her subject, till it was plainly heard throughout the hall. It is impossible to tell in the woman's own words her recital of endurance and heroism during the slavery days. She told of her escape from slavery in the South, choosing the doubtful experiment of liberty rather than submit being sold to a new master. A big price was put upon her head, and she came north, where she became one of the strongest workers of the Underground Railroad, assisted by Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison. Advertisements offered a large reward for her return were placed everywhere, and she told how her master was ahead of her posting bills, and she came along behind and pulled them down. Sleeping anywhere in the woods, under bushes, along the railroads, in barns or sheds, she pursued the work, and many a slave was helped to Canada and freedom through her noble assistance. Yes, ladies, said Harriet, I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never run my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger. When Mrs. Stanton remonstrated with her for giving to others what she receives to supply her own needs, she said, long ago, when the Lord told me to go free my people, I said, no, Lord, I can't go. Don't ask me. But he come another time. I saw him just as plain. Then I said again, Lord, go away. Get some better educated person with more culture than I have. Go away, Lord. But he came back a third time and then speaks to me just as he did to Moses. And he says, Harry, I want you. I knew then I must do what he bid me. Now, do you suppose he wanted me to do this just for a day or a week? No. The Lord who told me to take care of my people meant me to do it just so long as I lived. And so I do what he told me to.
In England, the fight for women's suffrage was heard in the theater for many decades. As actress managers made it a practice to write short plays proclaiming the rights of women. Here is one such, one act, a chat with Mrs. Chicky. Sarah said you wanted to speak to me, madam.
Oh, I won't keep you from your work more than a few moments, Mrs. Hickey.
Chicky.
What'd you say? Oh, Chicky? Yes, of course. My brother said I might have a little chat with you, Mrs. Chicky.
Shall I come into the hall, Mum?
Yes, just for a moment. I haven't come to keep you from your work. Please just go on with it just as if I wasn't here. I shan't interfere with you. You and I are the sort of women who like to stick to our work and not interfere with other people's, aren't we?
I'll answer for myself.
It's a pity. Everyone can't say as much. Now, please do go on with whatever you're doing here. We can talk just as well while you're working. Well, I'm trying to collect opinions wherever I go on a subject that a handful of women are making a great fuss about just now. I wonder if you know what I mean by women's suffrage.
No, Mum.
All the better. You haven't got time to trouble your head about politics, have you?
I don't interfere with what don't interfere with me.
Splendid. Well, the fact is, Mrs. Hickey.
Chicky.
Chicky, I beg your pardon. The fact is that a few women who haven't got anything else to do have some ridiculous idea that they ought to have votes and to do men's work instead of their own and interfere with the government of the country. And if you and I and millions of other women who know better don't stop them at once, we shall simply have England going to wreck and ruin.
Oh, then I have got to trouble me head about politics after all.
Oh, no. Let me put it a little differently. Well, what we want to do is to show everybody that by far the greater number of women don't want votes. And I'm doing my part by asking 100 women taken as far as possible from every station in life and putting down their replies so that I can send the result to a newspaper.
And how might you be getting on, Mum?
Well, of course one can't quite tell till one's got to the end. But when once we show in figures that most women are against having the vote, of course nobody can go on saying anything in favor of it.
Well, I hope you won't be disappointed, madam. I'm sure. But some people are that obstinate you can't make them see nothing.
Please don't let me stop your work, Mrs. Chicky. I merely want to know if I may put you down on my list as being against votes for women.
Well, of course, Mum. If I was to set out to explain to you...
I don't want you to explain anything to me, Mrs. Chicky. I'm here to explain things to you this morning. You'd like to hear something more from me about it before you say yes, perhaps?
I should, Mum, yes.
I thought so. Well, I can make the whole thing clear to you in a few minutes. You see, we think that women have their own special work to do in their homes. And of course, some of them have a council vote already about things they can understand, like lighting streets and making roads.
Yeah. Yes, my lady.
Well, isn't it better for them to leave the army and navy and wars to other countries, with other countries, to men who know all about them? If women had the brains to understand the things men settle in Parliament, it might be different. But they haven't. They're clever in another way. You can't combine politics and domestic matters, you see.
Well, you mean as home's one spear and Parliament's another, and they didn't ought to be mixed up.
Exactly.
Just goes to show you oughtn't to believe half you hear.
What nonsense have you been hearing?
Well, why, I remember Mario Jackson down our court some time ago telling me, some time back, when her baby got pneumonia from sleeping in a banana box because she didn't never take it to bed with her no more because Parliament had made a law about it. I'll give it her proper for having me on like that.
Oh, but I think she was quite right, Mrs. Chicky. At least I know there has been some act passed by Parliament in connection with poor children getting smothered in that way.
Oh, you don't say. Why, you'd almost think it was a mixing itself up with the home if you didn't know better, wouldn't you?
It's a splendid thing that such a law has been passed by men.
Of course, I like to see a woman have a voice in settling what's best for children myself. But I know some ladies thinks different.
Oh, you don't understand, Mrs. Chicky. Nobody could feel more strongly than I do that the care of children is a woman's work above everything.
Oh, she may care till she's black in the face, but she won't do much good if she's got the law against her.
My dear Mrs. Chicky, you talk like an ignorant woman. Now, my good woman, just tell me your difficulties and let me explain them away.
Difficulties? Well, I guess many a married woman finds it a bit difficult not being her own child's parent, going by the law, that is. It's a bit difficult for her, as the law don't give her no voice in her own child's schooling or religion or such like. It's a bit difficult, as her husband can pretty nigh starve her to death if he's the mind, but she's got to go the length of leaving him before she can get a maintenance order, and it's often none too easy to get that carried out. Oh.
But where have you read all this? I'm quite sure it's nonsense.
Read it? Oh, bless your heart, my lady. Women like us don't have to read about the law like you ladies. We're too busy knocking up against it, as you might say. I don't suppose any of your lady friends come before the magistrate, but once in a lifetime. But it's different with mine, though I've kept clear myself so far, thanks be.
But even if you're right, those difficulties would only arise where a husband and wife weren't doing their duty by living happily together.
Well, the law ain't made for turtle doves.
Of course not. But we were talking about votes, weren't we? Oh, this has nothing to do with them.
Votes wouldn't give women a bit of a voice in drawing up their own affairs then?
Oh, my dear Mrs. Hickey.
Chicky.
Sorry, Chicky. If the women of England had a voice even in such a roundabout that way as in making laws, what would the homes of England be like?
Maybe you're right, my lady. 'Twouldn't never do for those as know most about homes to have anything to do with fixing rules for 'em.
You don't understand what I mean. Fancy giving any woman such a terrible responsibility.
Oh, yes, my lady. You can understand some of 'em wanting to shirk it, can't you?
Let's get back to what we were talking about. I was trying to make you see, wasn't I, that all these ideas of women doing men's work are ridiculous.
Well, that's as plain to me, madam, as you were sitting in that chair. I hope the dust don't bother you, my lady. But I've no patience with the way you'll hear some folks setting women against men as if they were opposite sides in a battle.
I felt sure you were a sensible woman. And you know it's all nonsense for women to say they can do men's work. Women can't fight.
Try 'em?
I was alluding to fighting for their country.
Oh, Lord bless you, madam. I guess you and me wouldn't be so far behind the men in that neither. I'm the last in the world to belittle soldiering. I'm proud to have 2 brothers myself in that line of work. But the way some folks talk about men fighting, you'd think as there wasn't a man in England and stand up to be shot at once a week. It's a good job they don't have the bearing of the children, or they'd be that put out at risking their lives so constant there'd be no holding of 'em in.
You get so confused, Mrs. Hickey.
Oh, Chicky.
What I mean is that if women were soldiers and sailors, there'd be something at once for them to have a vote for.
Oh, do soldiers have the vote then? Well, I might have knowed. They will have their joke, will George and Albert. If you'd have heard them last election, going on like bears with sore heads because they hadn't a vote the same as most of their pals, you'd never have suspected it was just a do the whole time.
You mean your brothers? But it's quite likely that they hadn't.
Oh, how's that, Mum?
Well, you see, to get a vote, a man has to be a householder and pay rates and taxes, or a lodger and stay in the same place a year, and various things that most soldiers and sailors can't do.
Oh, then the vote hasn't got nothing to do with fighting for your country.
I never met a woman more difficult to explain things to. Can't you see that the right to vote really depends upon physical force, strength, and that women haven't got that?
Oh, strength, is it? There's a paralyzed man down our court what's wheeled to the poll regular. I pushed him there myself last election, wishing to oblige, of course.
Yes, but you mustn't take everything I say too strictly.
I'm not doing, ma'am.
What I want you to see is the broad principle of the thing. A woman's place is in her home, you know.
Am I to understand as your brother's not requiring of me no more?
No, really, Mrs. Chick, no, please, don't go on narrowing everything I say down to particular cases. Of course I don't mean that you ought to stop going out charring.
Oh, bad job for my own, if I did.
Yes, but don't you see how it all works back to what I said at first? You'd never have time for voting and charring, would you?
Well, I should say it took me a quarter of an hour to wheel Tom Wilford down to the poll, and it was on my way to work.
But it's not just the voting. Look at how this Mr. Welby had probably studied the question, and how he... What's the matter?
Only, you'll excuse me, madam, but Tom Welford can't read. He couldn't do no studying. My Josephine runs in now and again to read him the football news. They say he was a rare player in his young days, but he don't care to listen to nothing else now.
Very kind of her, I'm sure. Well, to get back to what we were talking about.
Yes, madam. We don't seem to be getting much farther, do we?
But I don't think there's any need for us to argue when in your heart you agree with all that I've said. I only want to be satisfied that I could put you down as being against votes for women.
And are you satisfied?
Oh, quite. There are hundreds of sensible, hard-working women like you who merely want to have the thing simply explained to them, and they see it's dangerous at once. I don't think I have anything more to ask of you, Mrs. Chicky.
Then can I ask you something, m'lady?
Certainly.
Speaking as one lady to another, no offense meant or taken.
Certainly.
Well, it's this. What are you worriting about him for?
About whom?
Oh, this little handful of women you've been a-telling me about. What harm can they do?
Well, they've grown. I don't say they haven't grown, but they've such a dangerous way of getting hold of people. You see, they promise excitement and bands and processions, and we can only offer dull things like looking after one's children and caring for one's home.
I've never found looking after my children dull, though I know it's what some ladies calls it.
Oh, you will keep misunderstanding me. I say that women who want votes think looking after children rather dull. I believe they'd like to make all women fond of politics instead of children.
Oh, will they make you vote then? Whether you've a mind to or not?
Never. I'm not saying that some of us might not think it right to use a vote if it were forced upon us, but so that we might counteract all the harm other women have been doing.
Oh, would they all vote the same way then?
Oh, yes, women always herd together.
But if you and your lady friends was all voting the other way, it don't look as if women would be herding together.
Well, it's no use trying to explain.
Seems to me this here vote's mighty difficult to understand.
Yes, too difficult for a woman.
Oh, then you don't understand it neither.
My good Mrs. Chicky, all that I don't understand is why any woman would be so ridiculous as to want it.
You don't?
No, I certainly don't.
Now I wonder if it would help you if you saw it writ.
If I saw what written?
Oh, it must be here somewhere. I don't know why, I'm sure. I didn't think of it sooner as I got it on me. Here it is, right here. Why women want the vote. A few plain reasons in plain words. I could have given them a few more if they'd asked me, but these is put very distinct they are. Perhaps you'd like to...
Oh, but you're a suffragist?
What do you think, my lady?
Well, you told me you knew nothing about women's suffrage.
Oh no, my lady. You asked me if I knew what you meant by women's suffrage, and I says no. I was just starting to tell you what I knew myself, right enough, but you stopped me. You said you was here to explain things to me.
Do you suppose I'd ever have wasted my time over you if I'd known? We don't want to talk to people who are against us.
I'm sorry, madam, I'm sure. But you see, this lot's so different. Seems to revel in talking to them as don't agree with them, they do.
May I ask where you got that?
Well, I bring it away from a meeting last Tuesday night. Perhaps you'd like to borrow it, Mum.
If you are going to be taken in by all that you hear at a meeting...
Taken in? No, madam. No one don't do no taken in where Eliza Chickie's about, thanking you kindly. Why, we've had two ladies down our street this week that tried to stuff me with arguments me own cat wouldn't have swallowed, and he ain't pernickety. We've always got on very well without women having the vote, says one. Splendid, I calls back. You may have, but what about us?
You selfishness never did anybody any good yet.
Well, Mum, I didn't want to call that out for fear she'd think I was just trying to sauce her.
Stupid woman.
So I thought, madam. But perhaps she was a bit hard of hearing, for she just says over again, we've always got on very well without women having the vote. Splendid, I calls back, with some of us making blouses at 1 penny a dozen, and actually managing to earn 6 shillings a week for a 14-hour day. We all keeps our carriages.
But my good woman...
Oh, says she, there's a lady in the audience. What makes the mistake of thinking the votes are going to raise women's wages? No, I says very prompt. The lady who's making the mistake ain't in the audience. But there's a woman over there who's got the sense to see that if her sex has got a vote what's useful to the men, they're more likely to listen to her than if it hadn't. Look here, madam. I asked you before and I ask you again. What are you doing it for?
Doing what?
Why? Carrying on with this here hobby of yours, collecting names.
I want to help stop this movement.
You might as well try to stop a leak in a saucepan with sealing wax.
Oh, but my good woman...
Yes, you might. You take it from me, madam. The first time I heard a lady on a street corner a-saying as women ought to have votes, I listens for a bit. And I says, I'm on this job. She knows. She's talking gospel. She ain't sat in no drawing room and read about us. She knows.
Oh, really, if you had any...
She didn't waste no time telling women out working to keep body and soul together as they ought to be queens of their own. She didn't waste no time telling women who'd sent their lads off to fight with their own hearts breaking for all their lips were smiling, as women who hadn't no feeling for their country and didn't know nothing about war. She didn't waste no time telling sweated women drove on the streets, women whose husbands give 'em a drib here and a drab there and their children going off naked. And the law can't help you, my good woman, says his worship in 9 cases out of 10. Women who get drove to despair with facing their trouble alone. And the man who's brought 'em to it gets off scot-free. She didn't waste no time, I say, jawing to women like that about the splendid way their interests are protected already. She knew.
No.
Oh, I'm not saying this here votes are going to set everything right. But I do say is anything that's done without it'll just be patching and nothing more. It's a going to make women count. It'll make 'em have to be reckoned with. I've nothing against the men. I'm the best husband who ever stepped. I believe the same as you do, that the men want to do what's best for us. But You have to be a woman yourself to know where things are, women. It's God's truth, that is. And I say, God bless the ladies who are helping us by stepping out for it.
Oh, I'm afraid you'd be wasting less time scrubbing your floors than as an orator, Mrs. Chicky.
Mrs. Chicky, you're wanted in the kitchen.
Pray, go. Of course, you won't understand my attitude, but nothing you or anybody else could say would make me change my mind.
Oh, yes, madam. I've heard that before. You see, my lady, me husband, he lived in the country till just before we was married. And he kept mules. Hand in hand with the struggle to obtain the vote has gone a cry for access to education for all women, for equity in education for women and girls. Here, Virginia Woolf, the writer, continued that debate for complete liberty for women in her address to Oxford University in 1929.
I could not help thinking, as I looked at the works of Shakespeare on the shelf, that it would have been impossible, completely and entirely, for any woman to have written the plays of Shakespeare in the age of Shakespeare. Let us imagine what would have happened had Shakespeare had a wonderfully gifted sister called, let us say, Judith. Shakespeare himself went, very probably, to the grammar school, where he may have learned Latin and the elements of grammar and logic. He was, it was well known, a wild boy who poached rabbits, perhaps shot a deer, and had, sooner than he should have done, to marry a woman in the neighborhood who bore him a child rather quicker than was right. That escapade sent him to seek his fortune in London. He had, it seemed, a taste for the theater. He began by holding horses at the stage door. Very soon he got work in the theater, became a successful actor, and lived at the hub of the universe, meeting everybody, knowing everybody, practicing his art on the boards, exercising his wits in the streets, and even getting access to the palace of the Queen. Meanwhile, his extraordinarily gifted sister, let us suppose, remained at home. She was as adventurous, as agog to see the world as he was, but she was not sent to school. She had no chance of learning grammar and logic, let alone of reading Horace and Virgil in Latin yet. She picked up a book now and then, one of her brothers perhaps, and read a few pages. But then her parents came in and told her to mend the stockings or mind the stew and not moon about with books and papers. They would have spoken kindly but sharply, for they were substantial people who knew the conditions of life for a woman, and they loved their daughter. Perhaps she scribbled some pages up in an apple loft on the sly, but was careful to hide them or even to set fire to them. Soon, however, before she was out of her teens, she was to be betrothed to the son of a neighboring wool stapler. She cried out that marriage was hateful to her, and for that she was severely beaten by her father. Then he ceased to scold her. He begged her instead not to hurt him, not to shame him in this matter of marriage. He would give her a chain of beads or a fine petticoat, he said, and there were tears in his eyes. How could she disobey him? How could she break his heart? The force of her own gift alone drove her to it. She made up a small parcel of her belongings, let herself down a rope one summer's night, and took the road to London. She was not yet 17. The birds that sang in the hedge were not more musical than she was. She had the quickest fancy, like a gift like her brother's, for the tune of words. Like him, she had a taste for the theater. She stood at the stage door. She wanted to act, she said. Men laughed in her face. The manager, a fat, loose-lipped man, guffawed. He bellowed something about poodles dancing and women acting. No woman, he said, could possibly be an actress. He hinted, well, you can imagine what. She could get no training, no education in a craft. Could she even seek her dinner in a tavern or roam the streets at midnight? Yet Her genius was for fiction, and she lusted to feed abundantly upon the lives of men and women and the study of their ways. At last, for she was very young and oddly like Shakespeare the poet in her face, with the same gray eyes and rounded brows, at last Nick Green, the actor-manager, took pity on her. She found herself with child by that gentleman. And so she killed herself one winter's night and lies buried at some crossroads where the omnibuses stop outside a local pub. That, more or less, is how the story would run, I think, if a woman in Shakespeare's day had had Shakespeare's genius. Alas, she died young and never wrote a word. But it is my belief that this poet who died young and never wrote a word still lives. She lives in you, and she lives in me, and in many other women who are not here tonight. But she lives. For great poets do not die. They are continuing presences. They need only the opportunity to walk amongst us in the flesh. This opportunity, as I think, is now coming within your power to give her. For it is my belief that if we live another century or so, I am talking of the common life, which is the real life and not the little separate lives we live as individuals. If we have enough to live on and rooms of our own, if we have the habit of freedom and of education and the courage to write exactly what we think, if we escape from our small sitting rooms and see human beings not always in the relationship to each other, but in the relation to reality, and the sky too, and the trees or whatever may be in themselves, if we face the fact that there is no arm to cling to, but that we go alone, and that our relation is to the world of reality, and not only to the world of men and women, then the opportunity will come. And the dead poet who is Shakespeare's sister will put on the body which she has so often laid down, drawing her life from the lives of the unknown who were her forerunners, as her brother did before her. She will be born.
Now hear the words of a contemporary young activist. November 2014, Malala Yousafzai wins the Nobel Peace Prize and addresses that committee in Stockholm.
Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, distinguished members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, dear sisters and brothers, today is a day of great happiness for me. I am humbled that the committee has selected me for this precious award. I am proud, well, in fact, I am very proud to be the first Pashtun, the first Pakistani, and the youngest person to receive this award. Along with that, I'm pretty certain that I'm also the first recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize who still fights with her younger brothers. I want there to be peace everywhere, but my brothers and I are still working on that. This award is not just for me. It is for those forgotten children who want education. It is for those frightened children who want peace. It is for those voiceless children who want change. I am here to stand up for their rights, to raise their voice. It is not time to pity them. It is not time to pity them. It is time to take action, so it becomes the last time, so that it becomes the last time that we see a child deprived of education. I have found that people describe me in many different ways. Some people call me the girl who was shot by the Taliban, and some the girl who fought for her rights. Education is one of the blessings of life, and one of its necessities. That has been my experience during the 17 years of my life. In my paradise home, Suwat, I always loved learning and discovering new things. We had a thirst for education. We had a thirst for education because our future was right there in that classroom. We would sit and learn and read together. We loved to wear neat and tidy school uniforms, and we would sit there with big dreams in our eyes. We wanted our parents to be proud and prove that we could also excel in our studies and achieve those goals which some people think only boys can. But things did not remain the same. When I was in Suwat, which was a place of tourism and beauty, my city suddenly changed into a place of terrorism. I was just 10 when more than 400 schools were destroyed. Women were flogged. People were killed. And our beautiful dreams turned into nightmares. Education went from being a right to being a crime. Girls were stopped from going to school. When my world suddenly changed, my priorities changed too. I had two options. One was to remain silent and wait to be killed, and the second was to speak up and then be killed. I chose the second one. I decided to speak up. The terrorists tried to stop us and attacked me and my friends who were here today on our school bus in 2012. But neither their ideas nor their bullets could win. We survived. And since that day, our voices have grown louder and louder. I tell my story not because it is unique, but because it is not. It is the story of many girls, 66 million girls who are deprived of education. And today, I am not raising my voice. It is the voice of 66 million girls. In my own village, there is still no secondary school for girls. And it is my wish and my commitment, and now my challenge, to build one, so that my friends and my sisters can go there to school and get quality education and to get this opportunity to fulfill their dreams. This is where I will begin, but it is not where I will stop. I will continue this fight until I see every child in school. Dear brothers and sisters, great people who brought change like Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa and Aung San Suu Kyi once stood here on this stage. I hope the steps that I have taken so far and will take on this journey will also bring change, lasting change. Let us become the first generation to decide to be the last. Let us become the first generation that decides to be the last that sees empty classrooms, lost childhoods, and wasted potentials. Let this be the last time that a boy or a girl spends their childhood in a factory. Let this be the last time that a girl is forced into early child marriage. Let this be the last time that a child loses life in war. Let this be the last time that we see a child out of school. Let this end with us. Let's begin this ending together, today, right here, right now. Let's begin this ending now. Thank you so much.
Finally, closing words from Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She made her last public speech in 1892 at the age of 77 before the Congressional Committee on Women's Suffrage. Her address was called The Solitude of Self, And it really summed up her deepest thinking about equality of rights and about the lives of women. The point I wish to bring before you on this occasion is the individuality of each human soul. In discussing rights of women, we are to consider first what belongs to her as an individual in a world of her own. The strongest reason for giving woman all the opportunities for higher education, for the full development of her faculties, for giving her the most enlarged freedom of thought and action, complete emancipation from all forms of bondage, from all crippling influences of fear, is the solitude and personal responsibility of her own individual human life. The strongest reason why we ask for woman a voice in the government under which she lives, in the religion in which she is asked to believe, a place in the trades and professions where she may earn her bread, is because of her birthright to self-sovereignty. Because as an individual, she must rely on herself. No matter how much women prefer to lean, to be protected and supported, nor how much men desire to have them do so, they must make the voyage of life alone. It matters not whether the solitary voyager is man or woman. Alike amid the greatest triumphs and darkest tragedies of life, we walk alone. In old age, when the pleasures of youth are past, children grown up and married and gone, the hurry and hustle of life in a measure over, when the hands are weary of active service, when the old armchair and the fireside are chosen resorts, then men and women alike must fall back on their own resources. If from a lifelong participation in public affairs, a woman feels responsible for the laws that regulate our systems of education, the discipline of our jails and prisons, an interest in commerce, in finance or foreign relations, in any or all of these questions, her solitude will at least be respectable. Seeing then that the responsibilities of life rest equally on man or woman, that their destiny is the same, they need the same preparation for time and for eternity. The talk of sheltering woman from the fierce storms of life is the sheerest mockery, for they beat on her from every point of the compass, and with more fatal results than for man, for he has been trained to resist, to protect himself, to conquer. Whatever the theories may be of woman's dependence on man, in the supreme moments of her life, he cannot bear her burdens. There is a solitude which each and every one of us has always carried within him, more inaccessible than the ice-cold mountains, more profound than the midnight sea. It is the solitude of self, our inner being, which we call ourself. No eye nor touch of man or angel has ever pierced. Who, I ask you, can dare take upon himself the rights, the duties, the responsibilities of another human soul? Thank you.
If you haven't got a pen, they need to move.